I'm looking at the bright side, Molarum.
Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds.
Would you mind identifying what you are?
We are the dreamers of dreams.
Are they in the proper approach pattern for today?
Negative.
Dispatch Ajax. All weapons! Now! Charge the lightning field.
Welcome to the Dispatch Ajax podcast. I'm Skip Harvey.
I'm Jake.
You sure are. And today we are gathered. We've been gathered. There is a gathering.
But there's only one gathering.
Well, we'll talk about that. Today's topic is one of Jake and I's favorite geek culture topics, and that, of course, is the Highlander franchise. You'd be surprised at the hardcore fandom of Highlander, considering most of the movies are terrible, and it's very, very obscure. But we're here to explain exactly why that is, and what that means, and how we probably would fix it if they did it again, which they might. They've been saying for the last 20 years. So, we're going to start off with speeding bullet points. And instead of doing what I would normally do for this, which is just like a brief bullet point-based summary of what we're going to talk about, I decided to just list the rules. So,
The rules.
in Highlander, immortals are compelled to fight one another, accelerating their combat during a period called the Gathering. And they follow these rules. Engaging in combat on holy ground is forbidden.
Can't do it.
But sometimes you can. Once a battle has begun, interference by an outside immortal party is not allowed.
Not allowed. Unless it is.
Combat is limited to one-on-one, unless they don't do that.
Happens all the time.
Only bladed weapons can be used, which means no ranged, explosive, or projectile weapons. This one they pretty much follow the entire time. Because
They
you could just...
do.
Yeah, because you could just drop a nuke on somebody and then you'd think it'd be over, but no, that's not how it works. And in the end, there can be only one.
Unless there are more.
Right, exactly. So let's begin at the begin, shall we? Highlander started as a film in 1986, and here's just a very...
I thought it started at the dawn of time.
From the dawn of time we came.
Well, I mean, they were always with us, and they're with us today, so I figured...
We were with you then, and we are with you now.
That's kind of assumed.
Have they been moving silently down through the centuries?
Moving silently down through the centuries.
I mean, they do live many different lives.
Living many secret lives.
It's like they're waiting for something. Like, maybe for ICP to finally become a thing.
I don't even know where you're going with that one. I don't... Oh, the Gathering of the Juggalos.
Juggalos,
Oh, okay,
the Gathering, yeah.
Okay.
Struggling to reach the time of the gathering.
So, Highlander started out as a film in 1986. This is just a brief summary of that. Your lead protagonist is Connor MacLeod, played by the mercurial Christopher Lambert. His character is born in the Scottish Highlands in the 16th century. After resurrecting from a fatal wound, MacLeod is found by a swordsman named Ramirez, who's played by Sean Connery, and he explains that they and others were born immortal. Their weakness, beheading, which I think you can say for most of us.
Yeah. I mean, it's not my number one weakness, but I mean, it's definitely up there.
Yeah, it's up there. It's like bullets.
A nucler explosion, unless I'm in a refrigerating unit, and then I'm safe.
Mm-hmm.
Then I don't have to worry at all.
Yeah, you're safe because there's no trauma from impact when you're blown 6 miles away or whatever.
Nope.
Nope, didn't happen. And of course, that thing never heated to 7 billion degrees or whatever.
You're inside a fridge. It's cold, Skip.
Immortals wage a war behind a veil of human society, fighting each other until the last few remaining will meet at the Gathering to fight for the prize. What's the prize? Good question. Why don't you tell us? After hundreds of thousands of years of likely immortal history, all of a sudden, in 1985, the Gathering is supposedly happening in New York, and MacLeod must make sure the prize is not won by his oldest enemy, the Kurgan, played by the great Clancy Brown. Okay, so that's the first movie. So let's get into what these immortals are.
This is actually a really good question.
Yeah, because it's very, very, very confusing. So the mythology of Highlander is based on the premise of the existence of immortals in general. Now, depending on which iteration, which movie, which episode, they're either born or they're made.
What does that entail?
Okay, that's a fair question. You were always an immortal, no matter what. You were always an immortal. But you don't become immortal unless you die of a violent death. And then at that point, your immortality kicks in, you're resurrected, and then you're that age and that person for all of eternity. Until the time of the gathering.
See, I get that, but what constitutes a violent death? Because, if I fall off a ship and I drowned, that's...
They do kind of address that in some respects, but not very many. So...
Because I was under the impression that if you died by natural causes, whatever they may be, you're not an immortal at that point. Also, apparently, if you're poisoned, even though it's by someone else's hand, it's not violent enough to become an immortal. Or, to turn your immortal button on.
Which really doesn't make any sense because, in that scenario, intentionally murdering someone by poison is still violence.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just establish this here. They're going to get real fast and loose with all these things. We're just going to try to get to the basics of what is already established, and then we can scrutinize. Because
I'm sorry, Teach.
I
should have raised my hand.
So without a violent death, of course, yes, an immortal will just die of old age or whatever. And no immortal, latent or active, can reproduce. They can't have children. That's actually a fundamental thing that they mostly never vary from. Okay, so should an immortal become separated from their head, there's a release of energy called the quickening, and it infuses the nearby immortal. And I always assumed that it meant that it was gifted upon the immortal that killed the other immortal. That's just a product of the fact that it's supposed to be one-on-one fighting, and that anybody nearby, if you're close enough, you will absorb the quickening, which is the quote-unquote power of the immortal that you've killed.
But sometimes it seems to be life essence as well. Like the personality aspects, and yeah.
And then there's a dark quickening, where the person you've killed is like a tainted soul or whatever, and then it kind of it's like the red kryptonite of quickening. It's the red quickening. This is the best way we can make sense of it. So,
well, that's probably the problem. We're trying to make sense of all of this, and it's not meant to. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but it kind of was. They tried. That's the thing is they tried to make sense of it. That's what the series was.
The series, yes. The movies, no.
Except in Endgame, when they both simultaneously try and make sense of it and introduce the continuity they've created in the series, the canon they've created in the series, and also completely contradict it at the same time.
Well, you can't bake a cake without breaking a few Highlander rules.
That's true. That is very true. Just ask Michael Ironsides. So, by the way, we'll get into the Michael Ironsides rules of character villainy, because I think there's an unspoken rule in Hollywood where if Michael Ironsides is in a movie, he has to lose a limb, and it just happens to be a head in Highlander 2. So, for his career, there are more movies where he loses a limb than not. Think about it.
I'm thinking.
Scanners, Highlander, Starship Troopers.
What limb does he lose in Scanners?
Doesn't his head blow up?
Oh, well, are we counting that?
I mean...
All right, okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, he loses both arms as Richter in Total Recall.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
We all gotta have something.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know how you get typecasted in that, but he does. Last immortal survivor inherits the totality of all quickenings, which is called the prize. What's the prize? Who knows? When there are only a few immortals left, they will feel compelled to go to a faraway land where they will fight to the last. If an immortal is beheaded and there is no other immortal nearby to absorb the quickening just dissipates into the ether.
Doesn't get doled out to everybody, just a little bit?
Nope.
You know, like
Nope, they just disappear. It's over. I think that's canon set up by the series, if I remember right.
it's too bad. Everybody should get like a 3-cent check worth of quickening in the mail.
Thanks, Bernie Sanders.
I want you to have this quickening. All Highlanders deserve medical care.
Okay, so
I am a Highlander, and I shouldn't have to pay for these things. We should all be paying.
have you been workshopping this?
No, it just comes.
So let's get into. Okay, so this is very confusing because it deals with both continuity set up by Highlander 2 and the series, and is completely inconsistent. No, it's not a big deal, but supposedly the quickening can repair almost all damage to the body without scarring or permanent impairment, except it can't regenerate lost limbs. But it can regenerate organs. Now, the only exception that I've found is in the first one when Kurgan has that giant scar on his throat because he almost got decapitated by Ramirez.
Which also is the same with Callus, who also got cut in the throat, and his doesn't heal properly there either. He just gets scarred. So I guess it's some neck-based trauma. Doesn't... But if you broke your neck, would it just stay, like, broken? Like, scar over?
I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know because, like, I think I don't know because more importantly, would you be paralyzed? Right? If you have a scar from a near decapitation, would you be paralyzed by breaking your neck if it was broken by another immortal? I don't know. I don't think that's ever been addressed. We're breaking new ground here, Jay. New holy ground.
If you smoke too many cigarettes as a Highlander, and then they put the voice box in, is it because it's not going to heal over, right?
Yes. Yes, it would because.
But it's neck trauma,
right? But not meted out by another immortal.
What if an immortal surgeon? Oh, but what if you're a pre-immortal and you do surgery on an immortal? Does that count?
Okay.
Or do you have to like switch over? Do you have to flip your immortal switch before any damage you do counts?
Well, that depends if during that surgery you die of what would be considered a violent death. So for instance, if you are that doctor from the podcast Dr. Death, you know, that real old doctor that
yes.
Yeah, if you're that guy and you paralyze a guy and you're immortal and you don't know it and he's immortal and he doesn't know it, what happens then? And what if some of the people he did end up killing, what would happen to them because he's a pre-immortal? Oh man!
But it also depends. I mean, is it violent enough? Like if he just is like say a lethal injection, apparently that's not violent enough by the immortal, scorecard keepers.
I feel like that should be like if you're going to make those rules, you have to take into account intent, right? And if you take into account intent, negligence is negligence while dealing with these kind of sensitive operations. Wouldn't you consider that violence? Like if you're acting in bad faith, I mean, it's kind of like what's the murder 2 for immortals? What's the murder 2, murder 3 for immortals? I'm not really sure. How does that fit in? Is there a mediator that figures this out? Is there a
Well, okay, if we go, so I just saw Highlander 2, and if we're going to count that, I mean, I've seen it multiple times before this, but I just happened to watch it today because I'm a sick and twisted individual.
Yes, that's true.
So Connor kicks a bird dude off of a train.
Right.
Or I think the bird dude just falls off the train, but then he falls under the train track, and his head gets severed.
Mm-hmm.
But that counts as a quickening. But it wasn't by Connor's...
Wasn't by a blade.
It wasn't by a blade, and it wasn't... I think that would be a murder, too.
Okay.
Or possibly even manslaughter. I mean, depending on the defense...
immortal manslaughter.
The immortal defense attorney, you might be able to plead that down just to a manslaughter. An immortal manslaughter.
Man, I wish they would do like a True Blood like show where like everyone suddenly knows immortals are real, and then we have like taught courtroom dramas dealing with the rules of, like.
Law and Order ICU, Immortal Crime Unit.
Oh man, no, because that just makes it sound like they're also doubling as ER doctors.
They can do that too. They're
Well,
immortals. They can do anything.
Well, especially if they have the prize, apparently. Okay, so that we can explain this to people, let's get to the actual rules. These are the rules.
All right.
Okay. So, the rules, as laid down by basically every version of Highlander, no matter what, though they all in some way contradict themselves, it forbids immortals from fighting on holy ground. And, holy ground is kind of a nebulous thing, but it's never really challenged much in the show. In fact, or the franchise in general. In fact, they in one instance they go out of their way to like sort of help define that through a plot device. So a holy ground is kind of defined as basically anything that's sacred to a large number of people. So that includes, like churches or chapels or cemeteries, monasteries, temples, mosques.
It does, but then do we get into the the government rules of what constitutes a religious organization or not? It's like, can you go into the Scientology building and fight there?
Well, considering most of that is all like just paperwork, like most of the Scientology buildings are just so that they can own land and then like use that to leverage for like tax breaks and stuff.
But if you get those tax breaks,
know.
the government counts you as a religious organization.
Right. But isn't it faith that's important to what makes something sacred? So, like,
I suppose, but how many people does it take to have, faith in something?
Is there any single actual literal individual within Scientology that thinks that empty office building that they're using for tax breaks is sacred? I don't think that's the case.
Tom Cruise?
It's a good question. No, I don't think he even believes that. I think that he thinks that's just like the economic like functioning of how the organization works. But it's a good question because like if it deals with faith, then there are a lot of cults. You can't fight on the
Nexium branding ground.
Right. Can you not fight at Jonestown? Really though? I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
What about every ancient burial ground of all of these cultures and religions over thousands of years? Does something fall out of religiosity? If we build a house that might have poltergeist in it, can we fight on there?
If in the poltergeist universe, when you didn't they move those graves, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So which one is the holy ground? Their original graves? Is it their original graves?
You'd think both places, wouldn't you?
If that were the case, would the poltergeist be all that angry? I don't know. I don't know.
Well, the logic of why poltergeists do what poltergeists do.
In the movie Poltergeist.
We're getting a little, well, yeah. It's all a little ethereal, one might say.
Mm-hmm. And a little weirdly ethnocentric and all that stuff, yeah. But it does raise those interesting questions. Are those Native American burial grounds outside of St. Louis, for instance, that nobody really remembers? Are they considered Holy Land because people did believe in them? I would think so.
I look at most of I would think there's probably a vast majority of non-water covered land that people have been buried on and are considered sacred. Maybe it was 5,000 years ago.
Sure.
But does that still count?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. Can you fight at Graceland? I don't know. I don't know the answer to this.
Well, you could.
Well, they do have according to the song Walking in Memphis, there is a spirit that guides you through the gates of Graceland. So I figured it is, at least in some way, holy ground. But what do I know? I've only been there once, and it's basically just a gift shop on a tarmac for an airport. So,
got a keychain, baby.
But they are taking care of business. So keep that in mind. Okay, so All right, so the interpretation of this holy ground thing, like, it changed as the series progressed. I mean, series of movies and the TV series both. While it's usually taken to forbid all forms of combat, in an episode of the series called The Road Not Taken, an immortal called Akeem's son challenged Duncan to a friendly sparring match, interpreting this rule as forbidding them from doing actual harm to each other, rather than a flat ban on just fighting in general. Duncan agreed, and then they fought, and then nothing happened, and it was fine. So in Highlander, Ramirez tells Connor that
That's I do that all the time.
I do it too because they did that on purpose, and I know they did. Highlander, the movie, stated that the Holy Ground rule was like an unspoken tradition, or well, just a spoken tradition. But Highlander 2, The Quickening, the original version, called it the Golden Rule, which made it seem like the prime directive in Star Trek. Like, this is the one thing you don't break. And in the series episode, The Hunters, Duncan says, quote, "Even the most evil of us wouldn't desecrate holy ground."
At least until
they do. Right. And then in the episode Unholy Alliance in 1994, James Horton was threatened by Duncan MacLeod in the Dawson family crypt and said, quote, "Holy ground, MacLeod, shame on you. You're forgetting the rules. I tried to get Xavier St. Cloud to come out, but even he wouldn't kill here."
Was that Dawson's Crypt or Dawson's Creek?
Are they different?
Pacey's immortal in my heart.
You know how the WB and the CW merged?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the WB and UPN merged to create the
Right.
CW. The WB is Dawson's Crypt.
Nice.
So in the episode Little Tin God, the Watcher, we'll explain the Watchers here in a second, Joe mentioned that according to legend, the rule was broken once, ACE 79, and a duel in a temple resulted in the destruction of Pompeii. And in Highlander 3, The Final Dimension, or The Sorcerer, depending on where you were when it was released, during the fight in a Buddhist shrine between Connor and the antagonist, Kane, played by Mario Van Peebles, Connor's blade shattered, and the power of the shrine was then sort of revealed to everyone. So there's divine intervention sometimes. In fact, even later in the anime movie, which is not bad, mind you, it's actually one of the better things they've done, Highlander, The Search for Vengeance, Colin MacLeod was struck by lightning, not quickening lightning, but regular lightning, for refusing to put down his sword inside Stonehenge. So, I know. So they're all over the place with this. Every time they create a new iteration, it really does seem like they try and streamline what this is and what the rules are. But they also end up, inevitably contradicting themselves. But that's mostly for like whatever corner they've already painted themselves in narratively.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what Endgame's all about. It's about, like, well, this is a thing we can't do. Well, we're gonna do it. This isn't your grandma's Highlander. Right. But I have theories about why. I mean, like, obviously vague theories, because like the original cut of Highlander Endgame, which is the fourth movie, the movie that ties the TV show and the movies together finally, in that movie, they break all the rules, but intentionally as a plot point to say, like, this guy is the only guy who can do this, he and his disciples. It's supposed to be different. He's the one that's supposed to break the rules, like you said. We're taking it up a notch. This guy can break the rules. And he drinks a surge and jumps on a skateboard. But it's like, okay, well, I guess we can break down the first movie quickly. So Connor MacLeod was born in Glenfinnan, Scotland, near the shores of Loch Shiel. In the Scottish Highlands in 1536, he fought alongside his clan against the Fraser clan. I'm guessing that means the Fraser Crane clan from the TV show Frasier and Cheers. The Frasers were aided by... Makes sense why they lost.
Oh, maybe it's Fraser Kane, and it ties into Highlander 3. Nah, we're just getting too far down the rabbit hole. Okay, so the Frasers were aided by an outlander named the Kurgan, who was said to be the last of the Kurgan tribe. And he came from, I think, what would be considered modern-day Russia.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they say what the steppes of Russia.
And this aid was in exchange for his right to slay the immortal that he can sense lives within the Clan MacLeod. And so during battle, Kurgan gets closer to Connor and realizes he's the immortal, and then he stabs him, trying to take off his head. But he's defeated and driven away before he can actually kill him, which, of course, makes him immortal. Much to Connor's surprise, he makes a complete recovery and then just gets up and walks back home. And his lover, Kate, and his cousin, Dougal, accuse him of witchcraft.
He's in league with Lucifer.
And the clan wishes to kill him. They want to burn him at the stake. But one of his other cousins, the chieftain named Angus, says, just go, walk away. And so he does, and he just kind of lives in the Highlands by himself. He kind of wanders around the Renegade or the Incredible Hulk.
Da, 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 da.
Actually, that sounded like the end of Family Ties more than it did.
He also did that. You didn't pay attention, but...
I was born in the Highlands of Scotland over 400 years ago, but I'm still alive. Sha-na-na-na. He's living in laughter and love, you see. Which is true, actually, because you take the next thing that happens in the movie, it's just a montage of him living in laughter and love with a woman that he married named Heather McDonald.
A bonny lass.
He's living the life. He's just hanging out. He's a cool dude. He kind of does some blacksmithing, but that's mostly out of necessity or whatever. And they've sheep and whatnots, whatever you did in the Highlands in the 16th century. Then he runs across a man named
Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez, Chief Metallurgist to King Charles V of Spain, and I'm at your service.
A swordsman from Spain, if you hadn't picked that up. A Spaniard. Never trust a Spaniard.
Yeah, but he's actually Egyptian.
He's Egyptian. He's an ancient Egyptian who's from Spain, played by a Scottish man. I mean, hey, all of this tracks, man.
Supposedly, just a little side note, he apparently spent time working on his Spanish accent for this. With a linguist and everything, and it's I can't believe that. You must have just been smoking cigars and eating caviar on the clock.
No, he was. He famously was doing stuff like that. So was he trying to bang the linguist?
I'm sure they made him hire the prettiest linguist around.
Oh my God, because none of that happens. He doesn't even try that accent. He doesn't even fake it.
Oh no, not at all. There's nothing there. But
it's not even they gave him eyeliner. That's how you can tell he's Egyptian. Seriously,
and a peacock plume. That's it.
Yes. And he's the one looking for the Scottish guy who's played by a Frenchman,
who also, when they cast him, apparently couldn't speak English.
Didn't speak a lick of English. I have a good quote about this from the director about this. Yes. Okay. His big point of emphasis is that the Kurgan cannot win the prize. Humanity will suffer an eternity of darkness. He trains. They have a training montage. They have a bunch of voiceovers. They have that weird scene where Connor goes underwater and then drowns and dies, but was resurrected, but then just sits there and can somehow breathe underwater.
Yeah, so that rule doesn't follow along ever again, as does the stag scene, where they take on the power of a deer nearby,
to
run fast,
which is literally almost shot for shot the scene in Rocky 3.
Yeah.
Where Apollo Creed is training Rocky.
Uh-huh.
I wish that you could just put that voiceover over that scene. It'd actually be a better movie.
It'd be great if they were running and they just happened to be on the same beach at the same time.
Oh, that would be good. So they become friends, which apparently happened in real life, too.
Apparently close enough that is the reason that Connery comes back for the sequel in 2, because Lambert was like, I want him back. Let's bring him back. Doesn't matter how. Let's just put him in the film.
Let's just do it. It's going to happen. I won't come back otherwise. He had a lot of, clout. I don't know. Considering how they could just recast him with his cousin in the series, I don't feel like you have a lot of pull in this sense, but whatever.
Well, maybe at the time.
Yeah. They didn't realize they were dealing with
Christopher motherfucking Lambert.
One night while Connor was away doing whatever, Kurgan found where he
Slopping the
lived.
goats.
Yeah, probably. He found his home, and then he dueled Ramirez, which was funny because Ramirez tracked him all the way there, and then somehow like didn't realize that he was in the area. And
Ramirez.
I love that. Literally every time I interact with someone whose last name is Ramirez, I say that to myself.
That's exactly what you have to do. It's your inner dialogue the entire time. And Queen is also constantly playing. So then Kurgan kills Ramirez and then rapes Heather, which is awful, but she never tells Connor about it. And then Kurgan just kind of skips away.
La 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 la.
Yeah, that's essentially what happens. And then years later, Heather dies of old age, and then Connor goes full Ronin or Yojimbo, and then decides to wander the earth. And he takes Ramirez's katana as his implement of death. And then 1985 approaches, and suddenly everyone thinks it's the Gathering. And the Kurgan is compelled to come to New York, where Connor now lives as an antique dealer, as a guy named Russell Nash, working with his like best pal, maybe love interest, but also adopted daughter, Rachel Ellenstein.
Yeah,
it's weird.
I bet. Well, they probably had a dabble like when she was, in her early 20s.
And then he revealed he was immortal, and then he's like, I can't do this with you.
Well,
and then
she would have known before then, right? I mean, he doesn't age from the time that she's, like 6 until...
Yeah,
I mean, it's 80s, so that's been 40 years?
Yeah, well, he keeps taking other people's identities, and I don't know. I always thought that was kind of a weird relationship. I mean, it ultimately ended up being, I don't know, not bad, but I mean, at first it just seems odd. Because, like, she knows, and she kind of she's like Moneypenny. She's Moneypenny.
Yeah, or the that helper and let the right one in.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You need someone to help you because I mean they're essentially live vampire lifestyles.
You're making it more sound like she's Renfield. I think she's more like Moneypenny.
Oh, she can be both.
I don't know.
Well, she's not controlled by him, but I think
she's not a familiar.
She's the closest that a Highlander gets for a familiar.
Yeah, well, yeah, I get. Well, I don't know. Richie. I know Richie might be the familiar of the story.
But Richie is a pre-Highlander.
Exactly. He's going to turn into a Highlander, which would make him a familiar. He's promised to be made a...
No, just because you're a...
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
you can be a witch's apprentice.
Yeah.
Long story short about the first movie, Connor ends up killing Kurgan and then gains the prize. Though,
wait, that's what happens?
Yeah, but do you always fall asleep before the end?
Oh man,
you always fall asleep, and then we have to drive you home.
Well,
you sleep in the back seat.
It was so cozy.
Okay, so a little bit of background on the movie, which is fascinating. It kind of explains a lot of stuff. So, a guy named Greg Wyden, he wrote the script for Highlander as a class assignment when he was an undergraduate student at UCLA. For inspiration, he used Ridley Scott's 1977 movie The Duelists, which was based on a Joseph Conrad short, as an inspiration. After reading the script, his professor said, "Get thee to a talent agency," and he ended up selling the script for $200,000.
Ooh.
Yeah, and then this is in the mid-'80s. It ended up becoming the first draft of what eventually would become the screenplay for Highlander. And Greg Wyden, by the way, would end up going on to write and direct The Prophecy with Christopher Walken.
There's definitely some similarities there.
There sure as hell are. No doubt about that.
He's got a type.
So here's some quotes about it from him. He said, "The idea of the story was basically a combination of a riff on the Duelists, guy wants to finish a duel over years, and a visit I made to both Scotland and the Tower of London armor display, where I thought, what if you owned all of this? What if you'd worn it all throughout history and were giving someone a tour of your life through it?" This is that scene was basically in the movie, kind of, I guess, because Russell Nash was a antique dealer, I guess. I don't know. That scene in Batman '89 is actually more of a thing than that. Whatever, I don't care.
No, I bought it in Japan.
King of the Wicker People.
So happens to be Bruce Wayne.
Give Knox a grant. This script.
We could just keep going.
We could literally do that all day. We have before. We've ruined many parties doing that. So.
And why? Because they can afford to be.
Put that away, Jake. You look like a tourist. So the script eventually found its way to Bill Panzer and Peter S. Davis, producers who had not long since before produced Sam Peckinpah's The Osterman Weekend. Davis said, quote, "The script was rough, but we were captivated by the idea. After our second draft from Wyden, Peter Bellwood and Larry Ferguson, which are veteran scriptwriters in their production company, they were brought in to rewrite the screenplay. Most of the key elements were already present in Wyden's script, but they had already been elected president. The idea of the game of immortals fighting each other until one remains, the characters of Connor and Ramirez, the beginnings of in the Highlands, and then so Wyden's script was really different. So in his initial story, it was way darker, way more violent. Connor was born in 1408 rather than 1518. Don't know why that's important.
Huh.
He lived with his mother and father. There was no Heather. Connor was promised to a woman named Mara, who rejected him when she learned he was immortal, which kind of follows the original movie and also the flashbacks in Endgame, but only because his lover rejected him after he was outed as immortal. And in the original version, he left his village willingly. His modern name was Richard Tupin. I don't care about that at all. And he still used a broadsword, which legitimately harder to hide under a trench coat.
Yeah. I mean, maybe if he's on stilts, maybe then it's
maybe. I don't know. I mean, unless he's wearing like the duster from Renegade, I don't know that you're going to be able to hide that very well.
Unless you carry it around like the Kurgan does in that sweet, like, break apart, sniper gun case.
Oh, yeah, that is kind of cool, actually. In the original draft, Ramirez, he was a Spaniard born in 1100 instead of the Egyptian garbage they tried to like shoehorn in there. And Kurgan he had no name. He was just called the Knight. And then he used the alias Carl William Smith.
Maybe, is this supposed to be he's going to try to kill the president?
I know. Doesn't it sound more like the Thomas Crown affair than it does Highlander?
Hi, I'm Carl. I sell insurance.
Yeah.
And I fight with a sword.
But Ramirez at one point describes immortals as, quote, nothing more than walking corpses living only to slaughter each other in an insane quest. That's a departure.
Well, yeah, it's a cool line. I don't know really where you go from there.
Yeah, I don't really know what comment you're making, but...
I mean, that's something that people later in the series would say, as you get into the, I don't want to be an immortal anymore, and the melancholy of living forever... But that doesn't fit for that character?
Absolutely not. And also, the whole, the Kurgan being sort of an unnamed guy who is kind of normal. He went from being some crazed berserker to being some polished guy who just games the system or whatever. That's 1,000 episodes of the series.
Yeah.
That's one of their bigger tropes. So some of the other elements were that initially the Immortals could have children. In fact, they said that Connor was said to have 37 children.
All right, these aren't quite Genghis Khan numbers, but he's doing all right. He's beating Sean Kemp out
and Derek Thomas, not Thomas Jefferson. And in an early version, his wife, who's in her 70s, and his two sons, who are in their mid 50s, saw him revealed as an immortal because he went to the funeral of one of his kids. And looked fine, even though they thought he was dead.
Right?
Yeah, I don't see how you could fit that in there. I mean, I get what you're trying to do there, but I don't really see how you can fit that in there.
None of this, this isn't working.
No, it's not. And so in this version, there's no quickening, there's no prize. Immortals can sense each other, but at the end, when Connor finally kills the knight, he just feels a sharp burning pain. And then he senses another immortal nearby, implying that this is just like the beginning of the gathering, and the game continues, which actually would, in some ways, would kind of be better than the ending we get if you look backward at the franchise. That would help solve some of the problems we have with the continuity of the thing, where you have to go, yes, that happened, but not that, so don't talk about that.
Yeah, but you're also you're making a one-off movie that then was popular, that they then made a bunch of things from.
Yeah, it makes it better in retrospect, but Yes, I understand why you couldn't really do it that way in that version. But in retrospect, it would have been better. It legitimately would have been better. Yeah, and he wanted Kurgan to be like tortured and evolved over time. That scene with Clancy Brown in the church is visceral and iconic and amazing, and he kills it in that scene. But like, they kind of have a point in which he's just kind of two-dimensional the way that he's portrayed.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the things that also works for that character. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I gravitated toward him as a child, for sure.
Yeah, but think about it. If it were a worse actor, if it was not as great an actor, would that scene work? Would that character work? I don't know that it would.
Probably not. But you have Clancy Brown.
Yeah, it's true. And he brings it.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, you also already have the guy in a suit who's at the very beginning of the film in the
French guy.
Yeah, the MSG fight in the parking garage. Seeing Clancy Brown in this definite like outsider, punkish bad guy from the 80s, taking over that barbarianism from hundreds of years ago and bring it to this modern day setting. I think you need that to really make him stand out and make his particular form of villainy feel visceral, feel, the impending doom of what he is and what he can do. I don't know if you get the same with, a three-piece suit. And
I mean, I don't know. That's debatable just because, I agree with you. I think it's that role, those scenes, they're so iconic and so like compelling. It's really hard to argue with, but like, I don't know, like if you were that guy hundreds of years ago, but now you've evolved and you've learned to live in this society, can you be that crazy punk guy without being like a cult leader or a terrorist or, you know what I mean? Like, can you just like exist in society that way?
But I think he also, as opposed to the other Highlanders, because we're just going to call them Highlanders, not Immortals.
Not Immortals? Okay, all right, okay.
He obviously doesn't give a shit about other human beings. He doesn't get, he looks at them as lower. I don't see him as someone who fits in society or never has, and he doesn't care to. And I think by putting him in the 80s aesthetic of the outsider who is the anarchist from society, I think it solidifies his ethos from those hundreds of years ago till now.
Yeah, I think you're right for the most part. Yeah, I do. He was a leader of men. He was a despot. If that's who you are fundamentally, why would you give that up?
I think in battle he was probably a leader, but even in the battle we see him in, he's essentially a kind of a hired gun.
Yeah, only because he wants to kill Connor.
Exactly, but I don't necessarily think he would have cared about leading humans into battle, and he's not leading other, vast swaths of immortals.
I thought that was kind of the thing with their clan in Russia. Like they were just like marauding,
I thought from what I had seen is that he had been all over, in different skirmishes and battles throughout all of Eastern Europe and Asia. But I didn't read or see him as a leader of men, a general kind of thing, just more of a hired gun, kind of just a giving him a reason, an outlet to just murder wantonly.
Well, but isn't his entire motivation to win the prize, to rule over mankind forever?
Yeah, well, I think he wants the power.
He's a warlord. He just only did that with the Frasers so that he could find whichever immortal that he knew was there and then kill him, right? So like,
well, I'm just saying, I don't think, do we know what he was doing all the time?
No, we don't.
And I guess that's just how I was reading into it.
That's one of the things about Highlanders. Nobody knows because they never tell us. They never, We have to speculate constantly.
Well, it's just a big part of like our attraction.
True. That is true. We kind of make it our own every time. So if his whole goal was to win the prize and become, the ruler of all of Earth, I just feel like, wouldn't he become Hitler or something? You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't
I
he
could
just
see him like kind of Jack the Rippering more,
Well, I mean, that's essentially what he becomes. I don't know. Yeah, I'm constantly conflicted by his character, and not that it's bad. It's better than most characters. Like, it's better than some of the two-dimensional characters we get a lot later. And Clancy Brown kills it in that movie. Absolutely kills it in that movie. I don't know. There are just things about it that don't really seem to fit. But I mean, who knows how people change over thousands of years? Like, it's really hard to tell.
And especially he's supposed to be just an evil character. I mean,
yes, true.
Giving him like motivation and 3 dimensions, I don't think was, at least in the version that we got, wasn't the goal.
True. I think Clancy Brown tried to give as much depth to it as he possibly could. And then, taken from the DVD commentary of the original movie, the film's climax was originally supposed to take place on top of the Statue of Liberty, like in X-Men.
Yeah.
And then it was changed to an amusement park, and then eventually changed to the rooftop of the Silver Cup Studios building. Now, the opening sequence was originally intended to take place during an NHL game, but they refused because they saw the way it was portrayed as emphasizing the violence of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Which, yes, that was the point of the scene. Yes. But it's at least interesting. I don't think that would have worked. I think it would have been better if it was a boxing match, personally. Because if it's the mid-'80s, the pro wrestling thing, I don't know. It always came across as a bit silly to me. And like as a metaphor for what they were doing, I felt like that was a little like, I don't think that really fit for me. It never settled right for me. If it were like a boxing match, yes. Or if like they were watching an underground fighting thing, like in Lionheart, where they're like, 2 dudes in a half-filled swimming pool. Yes. Okay. All right.
I don't know. For me, the pro wrestling completely worked. I mean, maybe it's because I was a fan of pro wrestling, and I still am. But the larger-than-life spectacle of these, iconic good and bad characters on display, fighting for supremacy and domination, in, a artistic but very theatrical manner. I thought it worked for like setting up kind of an idea of what we're going to get the rest of this film.
I get what you're saying. I just feel like in this scenario, it kind of like dramatically changes the comment we're making. Like, is the comment we're making with professional wrestling within the narrative of the film? Is it that the theater that they're putting on vis-a-vis the game, is it supposed to be taken also as theater? Is it the pointlessness of it? None of it's real. None of it really matters in the end. Because it does matter in the end, and that's really important.
Well, again, but you're putting on because it's a show that the professional wrestling, who wins or loses, quote unquote, doesn't matter. That it's a lesser form of competition compared to, say, a boxing match or a Lionheart, street fight. I think maybe that's the wrong thing to pull from that.
Right, but that's what I'm asking. Like, because, like, okay, let's say it is a boxing match, for instance, or even just the NHL match or whatever. It feels like in that scenario, the commentary they're making is, this is what human beings think is evolved violence. Like, we don't kill each other in the street anymore like we did back in their day. Instead, we turned it into this kind of competition where the violence still exists, and it's still a very violent game, but we're expressing ourselves in a different way. And the Immortals, who a lot of whom still think themselves evolved and better than human beings, actually participate in literal blood sports to the death. I don't. I just think the commentary is different, and I mean, and that's like of all things to get bogged down into.
We're in the rules of Highlanderdom and the plot of the first film. And,
that one's not the one to get stuck on. So
that's what you guys signed up for. This is why you download and you're listening for inane bull like that.
So the producers needed a director, and they needed a director with a very specific aesthetic that fit what they were thinking. And so they got the Australian-born Russell Mulcahy, who was best known for directing most of Duran Duran's videos. They downplayed this, but he famously nearly killed Simon Le Bon while filming Duran Duran's Wild Boys.
Really?
Yes, that's apparently a big deal. It's like Simon Le Bon has since come out and said that that's an urban legend, that he was fine, but the cinematographer, the woman who was the cinematographer on the music video, said that he nearly drowned and they had to rescue him during the shooting of that video. And
Jesus.
If you watch, I know, exactly. And if you watch it, and if you watch a lot of the other Duran Duran videos he did, not all of them, but some of them, like you can see where the Kurgan aesthetic came from, where some of the grungy punk thing that they didn't really understand yet as a genre came from. And then later, in 1984, did a really schlocky horror movie about a killer hog called Razorback. And so, for some reason, the producers thought that would make him the perfect director for this fantasy epic. So,
Razorback's a lot like Highlander.
Yeah, that's true. So Mulcahy describes the casting of Christopher Lambert this way. It was basically a lack of research. Quote, "We still didn't have our Highlander, and I was flicking through a magazine and saw a picture of Christopher as Tarzan from Greystoke. And I went, that's the guy. And so we cast him. And then when he was already signed up, we met him and realized he couldn't speak f***ing English." End of quote. And then he goes on to say, his agent assured us he'd be fine, but he could barely say, "Hello, my name is Christopher." So they constantly had a language coach on set, and 6 weeks of post-production were spent looping every single line of his dialogue.
Oof.
Oof. According to Mulcahy, though, the Scots that worked on the film, they turned a deaf ear to his accent and said, quote, "They didn't care. It was a really tight bunch of people who just enjoyed the movie. It was freezing cold. They're all in kilts, in the mud, drinking whiskey first thing in the morning. They were mad and wonderful."
Yeah, at least they put that line in the film of where are you from, Nash? Like lots of places.
You're right. I'm glad they put that in there because it does kind of cover up a lot of ills when it comes to that. And so Mulcahy goes on to say, we shot fast, Scotland, London, and New York. The budget was just $13 million, so it was guerrilla-style filmmaking. When we were there in Glencoe, the producer had to run down the mountain with a pocket full of change to call the studio from a telephone box. On the plane up, Sean Connery brought out a bottle of homemade scotch a friend had given him and said, "Come on, laddie, have a nip of this." It blew my brains out.
God.
It comes from Mulcahy.
Oh, man.
I would totally drink his homemade scotch, though. I'll tell you that right now.
I mean, I thought I had hairs on my chest, but then those fucking...
Ooh. You'd end up slapping an actress in Hollywood. That's the... Oof. Rough.
Yeah.
And this is one of my favorite tidbits about some of the special effects in here. Quote, "There was very little CGI in those days, but because I grew up in theater, I knew a lot about tricking the eye. For the fights, we strapped car batteries to the actors' legs and wired them up so they'd spark when the sword struck. After about 3 takes, the sword handles would get really hot and we'd have to stop. Dear God, he was electrocuting the actors."
It's crazy. Another wild bit is, so apparently Christopher Lambert, he has myopia. He can't see very well without his glasses, which is fine if you're doing a Shakespearean soliloquy. But when you're swinging large metal blades at each other,
a giant claymore or katana.
Apparently in the second one, he was too close to Michael Ironside and chipped his tooth. While they were doing one of their sword fights, but he just couldn't see.
Well, that's really funny because I heard, ironically, that Michael Ironside ended up slashing Lambert's hand during a sword fight because he doesn't know how to wield a sword.
It's like, hey, two guys who can't fight with swords and one guy who can't see can film it.
What set to not be on? Man, is it a wonder that he loses a limb in every movie he's in? Oh, man. So that's the first movie. That's all of it in a nutshell. And that's really the thing that, you really need to know as a foundation for understanding Highlander until you get to the series. But I'm going to read a couple of reviews of the first one. Danielle Griffin of Film as Art awarded the film 4 stars out of 4, saying, quote, "The key to Highlander's success is in its approach to its subject matter. What could have been a premise that breeds cliche is given a fresh approach due to Mulcahy's unique directing style and cleverly written script. Highlander is certainly a classic film that will continue to be cherished and watched as the world of movie making continues to grow and change. It's a triumphant example of the art of cinema, and watching it reminds us of why we all like going to the movies in the first place." I don't know if I completely agree with that.
I mean, I guess I like the heart of that review, but not necessarily the words of that review.
Yeah, I think that seems a little fanboyish. We can skip ahead to one of the more negative ones. Leonard Maltin, famous critic Leonard Maltin, gave the film 1.5 stars, saying, quote, "Interesting premise made silly and boring. Former rock video director Mulcahy's relentlessly showy camera moves may cause you to reach for the Dramamine."
Okay, again, he's not quite wrong.
I kind of feel like if you just average those scores out, yeah, you kind of get it.
Yeah. I mean, it's that's about a 3, right?
Yeah, it's about 2.5, 3. Yeah,
I mean that's probably right.
It's probably right.
It's both a great film and a bad film.
Yes, it is kind of both of those.